We're using Zoom for this meeting, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. The chair can request that members of the public provide their names for the purposes of keeping accurate minutes of the meeting. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to the meeting. The registration link can be found in the description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed for the meeting. Attendees will join in listening mode. They can then click the raise their hand button if they wish to speak. The chair will call on those who have raised their hands in the order they were raised, and all questions should be directed through the chair. As a preliminary matter, this is Ashley Arisman, Chair of the Nantucket Conservation Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Here.
Seth Engelborg.
Yeah.
Here.
Arisman here. Ian Golding.
Here.
Mike Miserelli.
Here.
Joe Plandowski.
Here.
Great. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Jeff Carlson.
Here.
I'm here also, Madam Chair.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Linda. And Will Delerba.
Right here.
All right. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. It looks like we have Paul Santos.
Oh. Shit.
Dan Malloy.
Yes, speaking.
And I think we have Rick Atherton joining. Good afternoon. This open meeting of the Nantucket Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Nantucket Conservation Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I'll go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or your computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. And for items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So that brings us to the first item on the agenda, which is public hearing discussion of revision and potential adoption of the Town of Nantucket Wetland Protection Regulations, Chapter 390. So as I know that commissioners are aware, I'm not sure if the public is aware, but we finally got our edits sent off to town council and essentially revisions sent back. So we're here to discuss that and hopefully come out with adoptable regulations. This is my first time running a public hearing for the regulations update. So first I'll open it up to commissioners. If there's any questions or comments based on the town council review or the draft that's posted. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One very specific comment and one general comment. The first very specific one relates to how we're handling invasive species within the wetlands jurisdiction. And I understand that in the edits, it looks like town council is suggesting just to include the Massachusetts prohibited plant list only. And I think that's a mistake. We had discussed in our public meetings to include an amalgamation of 3 lists: the prohibited plant list, the MyPAG list, and the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative's invasive plant species committee list. And I would like to see those 3 retained in the regulations, please.
Thank you, Seth. I would agree, the more robust, the better. I'm not sure what town council's perspective was for just including the 1. But thank you.
Yes, and there was also even a discussion for the IPSC list for a little bit more flexibility locally, that there could be actually just a link to IPSC website, which had a list that was updated, and we adopted it. Because that group is the group, albeit a volunteer group, but that's the group that is tasked on Nantucket with determining what are the invasive species of concern and what are the best management practices for those species. So I highly recommend we keep that list as part of these regulations.
Thank you, Seth. And did you have a separate comment?
Yes, but I'll see to the other commissioners and you can come back to me.
Okay. Linda, I see your hand up.
I was kind of disappointed with to me, it didn't seem like town council spent a whole lot of time reviewing what we sent to them, given how little came back from there. But be that as it may, he did flag the dwelling versus secondary versus tertiary, and I think he's correct there. But I still have some problems with the 50, the 75, and then the no pools in the flood zone. So those are my concerns. But I do agree with Seth on including, especially the new ones that have been added to the list, including the list and any relevant, send them to another website to get further information. I do agree with that.
Thank you, Linda. Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments are for performance standard updated number 4. I guess first a question. It says all projects which are not water dependent shall maintain at least a 50-foot natural undisturbed area adjacent to a salt marsh. I mean, are we saying there that everything is moving to a 50-foot no disturb?
That is essentially how it would read to a salt marsh, unless it's access to that marsh, or again, a water dependent use.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I don't think it's new. I brought this up at the other meeting that, or our past meetings, that that was a little problematic for me. And then from a public hearing standpoint, are we only planning on doing a 1 Zoom public hearing, or are we required to do one in public?
This is a public meeting right now, so we wouldn't have to meet again in person unless there's questions and we feel we need to continue again.
Okay, just my 2 cents is there's a lot of regulation changes, and I know a lot of people have worked really hard on this since before my time, but one public hearing seems a little light in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I know the public was able to at least attend our other meetings virtually, or in person. So hopefully interested parties were following along, to hear our discussion, but point taken.
I put my hand up a second time, Madam Chair, in case that went up
Oh.
and down.
Yep, I don't think I saw it go down. So perfect. Thank you for telling me. Go ahead, Linda.
I'm not comfortable with that either. I think we have a discussion today. We hear what members of the public have to say. And we think about it, and then we have another public hearing. I am not comfortable voting this all in today without any more thought to whatever anybody else has to say. So I'm not in favor of adopting this today without another public hearing.
Okay. No, I totally understand. I think we're going to see where the conversation goes and if the updates were kind of clear and concise enough for people. But definitely understand the want for more public participation through another hearing. Any other questions, comments, potential amendments from commissioners? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the general comment that I have that I still don't think is been resolved. And I'll ask the staff if town council weighed in on this at all or not, because we never really got to a consensus within the Concom at our previous public meetings. But there's been this ongoing discussion about increasing the distance of buffer zones. So moving buffer zones back linearly in specific resource areas. I'll first ask staff if Concom or if town council had anything to say about that.
Will, it looks like you have your hand up.
I was just gonna say, that was their weighing in on that, on those questions was actually included in the body of the email and not in the regulation update. But I can forward that email to everybody again. I just have to find it.
Thank you. And
ye-
can I just ask that people not speaking, please mute, because we're getting a little bit of feedback. And then, sorry, Seth, go ahead.
That's great. Is there any general sense of it? Because my next point is related to, or I guess I could wait for the email to come and speak again later. Essentially, my comment is, if town council has viewed that as something that is not a legally untenable discussion, we still really haven't had the sort of substantive regulatory or policy discussion about whether we want to do that. I know myself and other commissioners have voiced opinions, but I don't really think we've come to a consensus. So I think the first thing is to read the email and see if it's legal. And the second thing is to at least try to come to a consensus today about whether that's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Seth. So any other issues in the regs that were maybe flagged by town council or we think needs discussion or resolution? Jeff, I see your hand up.
Sure, I actually have that email. I know Will is sending it, but if it's helpful for people, it's not a long answer. I'm happy to read that question and answer into the record for people to hear.
Yeah, why don't you read it in for everybody? Thank you, Jeff.
Sure, so the question was, the commission floated the idea that if this change were to go through, they would be open to allowing primary and secondary dwellings up to the 50-foot line, but would hold tertiary or accessory structures to the new 75-foot, excuse me, no build line. Several questions have come up because of this discussion, but most importantly, would it be legal to hold structures to different standards based on their intended use in this manner? And that answer was, in my opinion, differentiating treatment of alterations within the no disturb area based on the type of structure proposed rather than the amount of alteration proposed could be subject to a legal challenge. In my opinion, application of the no build area should be based upon adverse impacts caused by any alteration within that area. Rather than differentiate between primary and secondary dwellings, in my opinion, it would be better to allow a certain total amount of square footage alteration within the no disturb area, assuming the commission wants to allow any alteration.
Thank you, Jeff.
And then there's a couple of short ones that go with that too. So there is the question that went with it. This change could create a significant number of non-conforming structures or lots to these updates. Is this good practice? Are there recommendations on how to address these situations within the regulations to have clear expectations moving forward? They put how to treat existing alterations within the buffer zone is a policy decision for the commission. The commission may not retroactively apply the new regulations relative to the buffer zone. The commission may wish to exempt repair and or replacement of existing structures from the new buffer zone requirements, but make clear that any new alterations outside of the footprint of the existing alterations would be subject to the new regulations. And then the last question was, are there unforeseen consequences in taking this kind of change to the existing regulations? And then the answer to that question was, the main consequences could involve fairness, questions about how to treat existing structures or alterations within the buffer zone. For certain undeveloped lots, the new regulations could result in restriction of development in areas that previously could have been developed. And those were the answers to those, but we'll send those back around.
Thank you, Jeff. Seth, I see your hand up.
So thank you, and I'm gonna weigh on Jeff for this, but this isn't a particularly novel problem. When the, if I'm not mistaken, when the Nantucket local regulations went into place, there weren't buffer zones at all, right? The buffer zones were added later in one of the updates. So, or maybe they were extended in one of the updates. So there has always been a history of, yes, some lots could have been developed with certain uses at one point in time, and then regulations change and there's different development in the future. I think that happens with Concom, zoning, HGC, everybody. I mean, that's just sort of a fact of regulatory life. I acknowledge that we're not able to go back into the past and change the conditions on site. Conditions on site are existing. This is future looking for new permitting. So I'm obviously very clear on that part.
Thank you, Seth. Jeff?
I would say to answer Seth's immediate question, that his historical context of that is pretty correct, that over time, there weren't always buffer zones, and they've come in post-adoption of those original bylaws and regulations. If you look at the original bylaw, obviously, the bylaw itself only requires permits for within 100. And then the regulations came in at a later date, to add in other buffer zones. Over time.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions, comments, amendments about the regs, Seth?
Yeah, so I guess to get to the main point of this discussion, can we have a discussion about how people feel about changing some of these buffer zone lines? What the impacts were? I know I've listed impacts in the past, particularly there's wildlife impacts with passage for wetland wildlife species. There's flooding impacts. There's cumulative development impact. I mean, so I've listed some of these impacts in the past, and I believe that's all part of this record still, because we're still in the same, item. But the thing I don't think we've ever done is said, like, I think this makes sense for all of these buffer zones, or I think this maybe only makes sense for bordering vegetated wetland or salt marsh or whatever, or I don't think this makes sense at all. And I don't think we can move forward with accepting a updated regulation without doing that exercise. I think the regulations we put into place here are very good. And I don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good. So if people don't want to make these changes at this time and we want to keep that till later, that's fine. But I think we can't really make a decision until we have that conversation.
Thank you, Seth. So commissioners, let's have this discussion. I know I am of the mindset that all of our resource areas could use the extra protection at this point for reasons that have already been outlined in the record. I think that the development pressure is having significant impacts on the overall functioning of our wetland systems. And I do think they could all use more robust buffers to protect our interests and the performance standards, whether it be bordering vegetated wetland or isolated vegetated wetland, salt marsh. They all have important functions that are better served by more robust buffers. So that is where I fall. I realize that from the development perspective, that's a difficult pill to swallow. But I think for the longevity of functioning wetland systems on Nantucket, I think it's an important step for us to take at this point, in my opinion. Do any other commissioners weigh in? And I know that we have differing opinions here, but it's important to get them out. Mark, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Ashley. Yeah, well, I tend to concur with you. I mean, I think right now the 25 to 50 foot zone is no structures may be in there, but we allow certain things to be within there that to me are not much different from us. I mean, they still disturb the wetland area. So I think it's not a very fine line to allow patios and fire pits and that sort of thing that are not defined as structure within the 25 to 50. But whereas we don't allow any kind of building. So I would support a much broader protection of the wetlands would include the 50-foot buffer. That makes sense?
Yes. Joe? Oh, you're muted, Joe.
I agree. I think there were 2 or maybe 3 lengthy meetings that we had on the regulations. We talked about this stuff ad nauseum, I thought. And as it's written, why shouldn't we adopt it?
I'm confused.
Thank you, Joe. Ian, you had your hand up, and then
I
Linda.
did, thank you.
You.
So, Joe, thank you for, so I agree with Joe, Mark, and Ashley on this subject. And so I say no more. Thank you. And thank you for expressing it so succinctly, Ashley.
Anytime. It's really Seth is the most articulate one in this group, but yes, thank you. Linda?
I'm so confused because I thought the last time we talked about this, I believe we were sitting in the ugliest building in Nantucket when we were sort of kicking this one around, and we really haven't kicked it around since then until, now we're getting to brass tacks. And we decide these things on a case-by-case basis anyway. So I thought at one point, Seth, and through you, Madam Chair, Seth had brought up something that was interesting when we went from 50 to 75 on certain things, and other things we wouldn't. And I thought it was a little bit more, Seth had suggested something a little bit more specific at that meeting, and not just this overall prohibition. So I'm still confused about that. Maybe Seth can articulate where I thought we were going at the last meeting on this issue.
So Linda, we were, but it sounds like town council was against us designating primary dwellings. Like that's what we had talked about, allowing primary dwellings within the buffers, but town council is saying that that's not a good idea. And that's why we're going back essentially to the beginning.
To an
Um,
outright ban, period. Yeah, I agree with town council on the use issue.
Well,
But are we going back to period, nothing?
so that would be the idea with an applicant's ability to request a waiver. Which, they can already ask for
do
waivers
that,
within our
yeah.
current buffer zones, and they could still ask for waivers if we extended the buffer zones. But I do want to give Seth a chance to speak if he wants to speak to his original point.
So that's what I was saying, that they can still come in and ask for a waiver. It's just that we've expanded the area within which they have to ask for that kind of waiver.
Yes, exactly.
And that's up to 100 feet. Are we still at 50, 75? I thought we had gone down to 75.
We'd essentially be extending what can currently occur between the 50 and 75
Okay.
to move out. So everything would move out 25 feet from where it's currently allowed.
All right, so 50 to 100 then.
So buildings that were allowed between the 50 and 100 would now be allowed between the 75 and 100.
All right, so they're losing the 50 to 75 unless they get a waiver for whatever reason.
Yes, essentially.
Okay, I got it.
Any other commissioners' comments on this one, Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, in reference to Linda's point, I did indicate an interest for like having specific uses allowed, but as Ashley said, town council is recommending we don't do that. The one thing that's important from this discussion that's still unclear is a 75-foot buffer zone line doesn't exist today. There's only 25-foot, 50-foot, and 100-foot. Well, I guess in Vernal Pool, there's a 75-foot, but in these other areas, we're gonna have to update the language to include that 75-foot line. But my intent is so right now, between 0 and 25, let's say not subject to waivering, just with the regulations, no impacts are allowed at all. Between 25 and 50, no structures, and between 50 and 100, activities are allowed subject to the performance standards. My proposal is to change the no disturb from 0 to 50, the no structure from 50 to 75, and the just subject to performance standards from 75 to 100 for all of the resource areas, both coastal and inland, that have buffer zones associated with them. Any questions on that? Happy to answer them.
I do.
All right, go ahead, Linda.
So, but they can still ask for a waiver from 50 to 75.
Yes.
Yeah, anybody could ask for a waiver for anything. If somebody wanted to
Okay.
build a house in the middle of a salt marsh, they could come in and ask for a waiver for that. The probability of granting it is likely low, but you can ask for a waiver for any project you want to do on Nantucket.
I'm concerned about that 50 to 75 period. You know what I mean?
Meaning you're concerned that there will be issues by not allowing structures within that space?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still concerned about that. I
No.
understand the reasoning. I'm just concerned about that.
Thank you, Linda. I think a lot of probably members of the public and people in development and construction and some property owners would as well be concerned. So, I hear your point. Mark, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you, I did. Seth, you described it as sort of a carte blanche, various areas, and I want to be clear that water dependent is a different set of standards, isn't that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, then I'm good. No, thank
Yep.
you.
Because with water dependent use, we essentially have to grant access to the water. So that would remain for property owners. Linda?
Just out of morbid curiosity, through you, Madam Chair, to Seth, is there any science involved with changing it from 50 to 75? Is there any, other than we would like to change it from 50 to 75? Or is there a basis to change it from 50 to 75? I think that's what my concern is.
I believe Seth submitted some great literature, but I'll give it over to him to reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's both science and policy to support this change. So I believe I submitted 2 or 3 peer-reviewed published research articles that talked specifically about wetlands, wildlife species such as frogs, turtles, snakes, things like that, and the actual biological buffer zone needed for them to have an adequate life cycle. And for some of these species, including species that we have on Nantucket, it's well beyond what we're talking about. For some of them, it's like 400 feet needed. We're only talking about 100 feet here. So we have submitted those studies to the staff. Staff should have a record of them. If they don't, I will resubmit them. And then there's also the policy side of things. I submitted local regulations from 4 different municipalities throughout the state. And in some of those municipalities, they have already adopted this extended buffer zone. And I'm forgetting which one it is exactly because it's been a little while since I looked at this, but we can look in the record. One of those municipalities actually created a 100-foot no disturb. So no activities at all allowed in the 100-foot zone in that town. It might have been Arlington. It's one of the ones that I submitted. We can check on that. So yes, there is both a scientific peer-reviewed research literature side of this, and there's a policy precedent for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I accept I'm clearly in the minority on this, and it's not so much from a development standpoint that it concerns me. I mean, people's properties are people's properties, and they're going to have what limitations they have on them. I think what concerns me a little more is just how it will make some things unworkable, and then are there going to be unintended consequences that come along with that that we just don't know about for the moment. So that's just where my concern lies, and I can see that, and I respect everybody else's opinion on the matter, and it will go where it goes. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, definitely valid concerns there. So it's important to voice those. Any other questions or comments on this one from commissioners? I'm feeling that the consensus right now is to include the more robust buffer areas across our different wetland resource areas as it reads. So, Linda?
We're not talking about the no pools in the flood zones, coastal areas subject to coastal flooding. We're not talking about that one yet, right?
This is, specific to the buffer zones expanding. So no.
Because I got a lot to say about that.
Okay. Jeff, I see your hand up.
Yes, I just want to be clear. So what we're adding is that enhancement to the buffer zones across resource areas for the next draft. Based upon the kind of majority opinion of the commission here. Not to throw a monkey wrench in, but just a kind of a question at a staff level. Would there be any appetite for Will or I to put together some sort of standards for buffer zone enhancement or mitigation for work down to the 50. Kind of pull together maybe what other communities are doing and then try to put something together. So if you're dealing with an existing structure, right, and there's no way to, hypothetical situation, you're expanding an existing house that you can't get outside of that 75, that there's some way to clearly have a design path for buffer zone enhancement or mitigation to deal with those situations, or to design a project from scratch to contemplate that as an idea.
I'm all there for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think any way we can help kind of applicants and the public navigate through our regulations is a positive thing. And I think this would, provide a great service to people trying to apply in these situations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think of it from Will and I's end a little bit where, someone's gonna come in and ask a question and they're gonna go, well, what can I do? And how do I do it? I'm wondering if with such a change, if we tried to put something together, I know, Seth, you were right, Arlington is the one that with the really big buffer zone. And there's some other communities that do kind of similar things, that I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of split the difference between the two and say, we're enhancing protection. If you can meet these requirements, this is how we deal with pre-existing things, or be able to look at a site more specifically and say, maybe the house makes more sense here because we can do enhancement and make better habitat that's more contiguous here, and try to put that together. But I kind of spitballing on the fly, so I'll have to take some time to put it together, but I think we'd be happy to at least give it a shot.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I know, I think that would be beneficial. Seth, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jeff. So in that scenario, right, what would happen is somebody would come in and they would apply for a waiver, likely for no reasonable alternatives, no adverse impact, or maybe for long-term net benefit. And I think if you guys get that kind of like list of enhancements together, another way of looking at it would be like, here is the minimum requirements to classify for long-term net benefit. I hesitate to make our regulations too strict because then, there's issues with that. But like, for instance, if you are trying to rebuild a house on site at a 50-foot line and you can't move it back to 70-foot line, then there could be a sort of like list of things you need to do, compensatory flood storage, buffer zone plantings, etc. All these things to essentially tick the minimum box for a long-term net benefit.
Thank you, Seth. Jeff?
Yeah, I think that we're kind of on the same page for dealing with that. I mean, I think we're just trying to make it as user-friendly as possible, and I don't want to speak for Paul or Dan or Mark or Don who are on here, but to also give those guys a fighting chance to understand how they can design projects and lay out sites and have a reasonable chance to put their best foot forward.
Thank you, Jeff. Any comments, questions, amendments from commissioners to the regs? Or anything that we saw that town council maybe commented on before I open it up to our members of the public? Linda?
Well, I'm back to that no pools in the land subject to coastal flooding thing again. I think that's insane, but I'm not a pool person. I don't like pools. Obviously, I have to deal with pools a lot. But that takes out huge amounts. You're already not allowed to have them by zoning. in the ROHs, and you're now, and you have to have 7,500 square feet in the R5s, R1s. R5s is a lot of Grand Point. I just, I can't go there at all. So I don't know where to go with this, because that's still in there.
So Linda, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So you would like to see pools still be allowed within the flood zone?
Well, you know, we got the A zones, AE zones, we got different zones. I was never really happy with that one down on Easton Street because of where it's located. But this would take out the one in the, let's say the beachside came in for a new pool, not the alteration that they came in with before. That would take out the beachside, that would take out other areas like that. And I mean, I can't do that. I can do it. I think we're seeing them individually anyway. And it's case by case basis now. And there are some areas I'm just not happy with them on. And the White Elephant even took theirs out. Moved over to the Harbor House complex. White House, you know, the White Elephant Villages. I think that's just too much, frankly. Because I think we see them now anyway in those zones. But I just say no pool at all ever in a huge area. Because remember, when they redid the flood maps, that included in the entire Grand Point. But I'm having trouble with that particular section.
Thank you for bringing this up, Linda. Pools in the flood zone are certainly a hot topic for us lately. You know, I for one, do think that they should be banned from the flood zone. You know, part of the flood zone standards ask that we allow for flow through and floodwaters to, you know, rise. And that's why we have breakaway panels, et cetera. And a pool, you know, inherently stops or impedes those floodwaters. It's also problematic for potential mixing of floodwater with pool chemicals. And I think with, you know, future projections and our coastal resiliency plan identifying, you know, the flood zones even expanding further, it would be wise for us, in my opinion, to be proactive and try and eliminate those structures now before we have, you know, pools that are causing major problems as flooding events increase. But of course, that's just me. And Linda, I see your hand back up.
I'm not happy with pools at grade at all. That's why that one out on Easton Street still irritates me. But there are pools that can be elevated where the top of the pool is above, like your first floor, above the requirements for a structure in those flood zones. So I'd hate to ban them entirely if they get them up above, like their air conditioning units, all that stuff has to be above the flood zone all over Grand Point now. But I'm not willing to say no pools at all if they find a way to get it above, you know, the top of it above where there would be washover, which is what my concern is, are the ones on Easton Street, without being specific to that, but it was at grade. And I think pools at grade in the flood zone are a real threat, because it doesn't matter if it's, people keep telling me, oh, it's a saltwater pool. I said, that means absolutely nothing. There are chemicals in the salt water. It's pool water. I don't care if it's salt water. It's pool water and it has chemicals. So that's my concern, is that if you can get it above, like your first floor, above top of it, so it doesn't wash over, I don't think we should outlaw those. I think we should do those on a case by case basis. So that's what I'm struggling with, that.
Thank you, Linda. I think I understand your point. I know I still have concerns just about like the engineered stability of those raised pools, you know, in flooding events, but we'll open this up, you know, to other commissioners for kind of opinion and discussion, because it's more than just the two of us. Linda, go ahead.
Well, just one more point. A lot of this stuff, I think we're going to have a sunset date, like they take effect on September 1st or something like that. So people get an opportunity to sort of acclimate to whatever we're doing.
Thank you. I believe it's a 30-day Is it Jeff or is it 90? But Jeff, go ahead.
Sure, just to answer this question once for the night, so we have a minimum notice requirement. Or we have to publicly advertise the effective date of the regulations. I believe we have a 3-week requirement for that. Just as an example, I think as good practice, right, if we were somehow to adopt them tonight. I think setting an effective date of like July 1st, so you have that full month to advertise, and we'll check the calendar. But I think from date of adoption to effective date would be at least a minimum of 30 days.
Thank you, Jeff. Does anybody else want to weigh in on the pools in the flood zone, if we think that's too strict or not? Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I fully support not having pools in the flood zone that interact with the ground in any way. So any underground pool, any at-grade pool, any like slightly elevated pool that would be on piers or piles that would be technically above grade but have a support that is below grade. However, that being said, the regulation as is written right now says all. So theoretically, like let's say you have a 15-foot high porch in the flood zone and you want to put an above ground pool on there, you wouldn't be able to do that either. So we might have to make that a little bit more specific, because I think personally an above ground pool that's way over the flood zone elevation, like 10 feet over the flood zone elevation, isn't going to cause any impacts. Anything that's in the ground at all or has the ability for water to mix is going to have an impact.
Thank you, Seth. Ian?
So I guess through you to Linda or Seth, are these pools going to have breakaway panels at the base? I mean, are they going to be, if you're trying to have a 8-foot pool and you want it above the flood zone, it's going to be basically up at 20 feet or more. So how is this going to work in terms of an engineering? So, because that is, of course, the stipulation we have in all flood zones, that any structure in the flood zone has breakaway panels and, you know, to allow free flow through.
Thank you, Ian. Linda, I see your hand up.
I have seen an engineered plan where it does just that. It allows the water to, I'm sure the surveyors know better, allows the water to flow freely underneath it like it does a house that's on piers, without being fully, you know, a thick foundation all the way around with no breakaway panels.
Thank you, Linda. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know if anyone uses these on Nantucket, but where I grew up, like some people in the town just had these circular pools that were like a unit that they're probably filled with a garden hose, to be honest. They weren't probably super nice, and there's probably better ones that exist today. But if you have a porch, like a structurally sound large porch, and let's say it's at elevation 10 and your flood zone elevation is 8, and you put that pool on the porch, so now the top of that pool is, let's say, like elevation 16. To me, there's no impact of that. Unless the entire porch collapses, that pool is never interacting with the flood zone, with flood waters, with anything. It's up on a porch. So I would support like above ground standalone unit pools elevated above the flood zone only. Nothing that has any interaction with the ground. So nothing that's elevated on a pier or a pile or any type of engineered solution, just standalone things on a porch. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Seth. I can picture that pool well, because one of my friends had one growing up and it was like the best thing. But I don't think people accept those as pools locally anymore. They need fancier. But yes, I understand, or like a standalone hot tub spa that goes on your deck. I would agree those don't have the same impact. Any other questions, comments, opinions from commissioners on the pools? Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a strong like or opinion about pools. I do agree with Seth if somebody could put one above the flood zone. They're probably not so likely on Nantucket. But in general, I don't think there's a lot of appetite for pools in the flood zone across the board on the commission. Thank you.
Mike. Any other, again, questions, comments, opinions on the pools in the flood zone? On possibly changing the language around slightly to allow, a pool that would be kind of a standalone, not interacting with floodwaters or kind of the soil. Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I didn't complete my thought in my own mind, but my question would be, and I think I know the answer to that, is people could come in and ask for, we're not excluding anybody for asking for a waiver for that, as unlikely as it might be.
Exactly. People can really ask for any waiver they want, even if it would seem completely ridiculous under our regulations. Not saying that this one would be, but anybody has the option to apply for a waiver. Yes. So commissioners, where do we fall here? Do we want the language changed just slightly to allow for pools that would sit, again, kind of outside of flood elevation or above flood elevation, isolated on like a porch type structure? Linda?
I think that's where I'm headed. They will have a pier underneath them, from what I gather, to stabilize them. We don't want them just floating in a deck. They would have some sort of a support underneath it, pretty much like the pier next to the porch and the house that they're on. So I'm not saying there's not going to be any contact with the ground, but they'd be on some sort of a support pier, very similar to what the house is sitting on, more than likely. So that's where I was headed. And the top of that pool, the edge of the pool, I don't know how we write that, but the edge of the pool, the top of the pool has to be above the floodplain, period. So if the first floor of the house is above the floodplain, the first floor of that, the top of that pool has to be above it. So there is no threat for it to wash over the top of that pool.
Yeah.
Or higher.
No, I would agree with you. I know I'm still kind of the opinion that we should say no pools. I mean, I know that we don't distinguish pools and spas very differently, but I think a small hot tub would be okay. Even the pool the size that Seth described, I think would be large on a deck and probably inappropriate, adding to noise pollution, etc. But I'm trying to kind of think of options here. So again, any other?
Surveyors may have an idea. Actually, the surveyors may have better handle on this than I do.
Yes, for sure. So should we just let Joe? Oh, you're muted.
I did a little research on pools, residential swimming pools, and here are the boundaries for it. Whether above or below grade, containing more than 24 inches of water, it's got to exceed 150 square feet of water surface area or exceed 1,000 gallons. So I will tell you, when I got this definition and I went back and looked at some notes on Mariner, this is a conflicting bylaw in my mind, but that's for another day. And when it comes to pools, over 30 years, I lived in Tampa, Philadelphia, and Chicago. And in each one of those homes, we had an in-ground pool. Never had a problem. And I hear people in some of these discussions talking about problems with pools. Pools are fine. What I have a problem with here on Nantucket is the biggest pool is the ocean. And you don't get enough use out of a pool here. You get maybe 2 months, 3 months at most. But there are a lot of pools going in. In the area that I live, people are putting pools in. It's like crazy. There's a development within 100 yards from where I am where there are 9 homes going in. Everyone is having a pool, all 9. It's a different world.
Yep, it is. And I think that one day we'll look back at the cumulative impact of all those pools, and be sad that we let them go in so unregulated island-wide.
I agree.
Linda, I see your hand up.
Plus the town meeting, the definition of pool, small pool, medium-sized, large pool, spa, all changed in the bylaw. So there's a whole new thing coming. If anybody had it, I've seen it. But there's a whole new regulation for pools. But from the zoning perspective, they're pretty tight in certain zones like Mattakit and ROH, not at all. R1, R5, they're regulated. So it's not as much of a free-for-all on the small lots. The larger lots obviously have 10 to 20 to 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acre size lots. It's not as big of an impact, but I agree with Joe. We turned blue before they could get us out of the water. We were kids. So, yeah, but everybody's got to have one.
All right, Commissioner. So who would be willing, or who would want to change the language to allow kind of pools up on decking versus, keeping the language that's in there, not allowing pools within the flood zone entirely?
I'm for not allowing pools within the flood zone entirely. I just see it too complicated going the way that we're going with those sort of exceptions. Plus, I wouldn't have thought the HDC would have much interest in pools, stuck up in the air, but that's a separate issue.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Ian. Linda, I see your hand up.
If they're embedded in decks, they can't be seen from a publicly traveled way, and that's how the HDC rolls, or they're screened within an inch of their lives. But this is another one, Jeff said something about creating standards between the 50 and the 75. This would be another one to throw on his desk to have Jeff come up with some language that would address this for another meeting, for another public hearing. I don't want to try to craft something at this point because I'm back to the top of the pool has to be above the floodplain type of thing. So I'd rather have Jeff come up with that language than us try to figure it out.
No, I think that would be helpful. I think I worry in some ways about allowing pools in the flood zone, knowing that these zones will change, as laid out in the coastal resiliency plan. So what today might be, well above the flood zone in 15 years might be in kind of the danger zone. So I think that's where I say I am fine having no pools within the flood zone because I think the impacts now and in the future are great. But we're all going to have, I think, differing opinions here. Go ahead, Linda.
That would be, given that, the coastal resiliency, and Ian knows more about that than I do, that if those zones change and, FEMA, they redo their zones. That's how we got stuck with all of Brant Point instead of just part of Brant Point. I'm wondering if we present this in this way to town council, where it's going to be a moving target on people that currently are not in it, and that all of a sudden they get in it without realizing that zone changed when they redo them. I think there might be a legal issue there.
Yeah, we could talk about kind of the grandfathering. I also worry that people just aren't doing their due diligence when they're buying properties that are in these risky spots. blows my mind that people would not be aware of these issues, but I realize that that's the reality. So Jeff, I guess this is maybe another one for us to table a little bit and throw around some potential options.
Yep, we'll add it to our list and we'll do some research, and between Will and I will figure out some way to encapsulate the conversation into onto paper.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions, comments, amendments, or issues with the regs as they currently are, just so we make sure anything else that is kind of left undone, we can get clarity on before we'd have another meeting? Great, it looks like no, so we'll open this up to our members of the public to see if they have any questions or comments about what we've discussed tonight or the regulation updates in general. And I just want to remind everybody to please raise your hand virtually, and then I will call on you. Jeff?
Oh, he just put up his hand. I want to say Dan Malloy sent an email with a number of questions and concerns. I'm sure he can describe them a lot better right now, but I'll share that email with the group once we finish up as well.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Dan Malloy, go ahead.
Thank you. I won't go into a lot of details. I'll spare the time, so if Jeff's going to forward it around. One of the questions I have, which I think it sounds like it would answer. So based on some of the changes you're talking about already, so I'm assuming there likely will be another public hearing. Oh, we don't know yet, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know yet, but it sounds like there's at least a few commissioners who would like that. The only worry I have is we do have appointments coming up.
I guess one of the questions or things I'd push, I understand the appointment concern, but with some of the changes that are already being discussed tonight, regardless of whatever questions or comments I might have, I don't know that the drafts that are out on the street and everybody's looking at right now, for example, I don't think everything contemplates a wholesale shift of 25 feet in all the buffer zones. So I'm not, generally speaking, I'm not sure if the public was really aware that that was on the table. And that's something that I think a lot more people would likely comment on if they were aware of it.
Thank you, Dan. I know that was made public. The select board had questions about it back in December, I believe. So that's definitely been floated around out there, but people who don't follow along closely, could have missed that. So point taken.
Right. I don't think it's actually in the drafts that are out there. It may have been discussed, but I don't think it's in a draft as of yet. And I get something else. I'm not sure if this would be under consideration. I know Jeff mentioned that typically a 30-day effective date, but I'd ask the commission to consider something, some more of a delay in some of these things, because I've seen this under town meeting, some of the zoning changes on similar things where if the commission does go ahead and put some of these additional restrictions in place, or even some of the buffer zone restrictions, there's a lot of people say that have just purchased property or are about to purchase property, and 30 days later, they're starting their plans and all of a sudden they can't build. Or all of a sudden, everything they purchased the property to do, the regulations I'm just asking to consider some type of a expanded time for whether it's 6 months or something to give people the chance to actually digest the regulations and file permits. It's just a little unfair to them. So I know this is a big problem with some of the zoning changes as well. It's just something if you consider that, if it's even a possibility. But we also, both Mark Ritz and I, we went through some of the changes, we went through all the definitions. We did have a lot of questions on some of the general definitions. I guess I'll spare the reading it all if you can just read the email instead, but there's a lot of little questions we had in some of the definitions, some of the wording. some of the impervious surface definitions, for example. Something like a pervious surface, brick pavers are popular for pervious paving or pervious pavement itself. So is that something that the commission would consider under a waiver scenario, or is that just going to be considered an impervious surface and banned, period? Because there's different things, the way it's worded, that don't seem very clear, leave just a lot of room for interpretation. And some of the other definition questions we had in several of the paragraphs and some of the new changes, there's discussion of, some of it has to do with the alternatives analysis. There's discussion of feasibility, or if something is feasible, then it has to be done. There's really no definition of feasible. So to what extent, what do you go with deciding if something is feasible? I mean, it's very arbitrary. I'm not sure if you can put a definition on that, but putting some thought to that would certainly be helpful. One of the other things we just thought of as we were listening to the discussion, the proposed definition of swimming pools limits it to 100 gallons. And I know hearing some of the back and forth, there was discussion, well, if it was raised above floodplain, maybe that would be okay. Or if it was just a simple hot tub, maybe that would be okay. But I'd want to just put it out there that even something like a simple hot tub, they'd see at someone's house is over 100 gallons. So, I may want to consider revisiting that definition, maybe increasing it to a 200 gallons if you think a spa is acceptable, as long as it's raised up, and maybe the 100 gallons is too excessive. Some of the other things that are in there, the depth to groundwater restriction or the waiver we see all the time. So 2 foot separation of groundwater waivers to all these different things. I guess would like to see what the basis is of that. That's been an ongoing discussion for quite some time since it was first enacted. And there has yet to be any real basis as to what the 2 foot restriction of groundwater was ever utilized for. If it was somehow some scientific factual basis for its being implemented. So would really like to see something in more detail on that. So, I mean, I've got the email in there. There's lots of comments on there if anybody have a chance to read it. I think we'd also like to take a chance to read some of the information. I know that Seth filed to do with providing some backup and history for some of the bylaw, some of the buffer zone changes to really see. I'd just like a chance to read it, to see what the scientific basis is for some of this stuff. The policy stuff, we don't put a lot of weight in. Just because it's a policy doesn't mean it should be continued or expanded. But we'd definitely like to read the scientific basis for it. So I'll leave it at that. If you have the time to please read the email that we sent out, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I know we did discuss the 2 foot separation of groundwater when we had some meetings on our regs. So, and that should all be recorded so we can make sure members of the public who want to hear those discussions or see what happened, can watch those recordings as well. And maybe staff can post some of the supplemental documents online, with our regulations update information so that it's available to all. Jeff, go ahead.
So we've posted the stuff that Seth provided before, so I think what we'll do is we'll post it, because I'm sure we rolled over years in there somewhere too. So we'll make sure that it's all actively reposted currently. Maybe we'll try to see if Florencia can't. We might have a separate web page for just the regulatory updates that will spin off. But we'll try to have all of that up tomorrow at some time, at least posted to where we post the regular Concom digital packs for just a regulation update info, when I'll have all of the submissions previous on top and the stuff for today.
Thank you, Jeff. Paul, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Ashley. I would just like to echo Dan's sentiments regarding the increase of the setbacks. Only because I think of all the stuff that's being done, that's probably the most significant. And it didn't show up. It doesn't show up in the summary. It didn't show up in the town council's edits. So I just feel like if that's the way the board's going to go, that, you know, at least another publication of the proposed regs with those components in it, I think would be helpful. I mean, we all know how the commission treats the 50-foot setback for new construction. I mean, it's a hard fast. It's basically non-waiverable for all practical purposes. So we know that if you're going to adopt those regulations, that building within the 75 is going to be, you know, even though you have the ability to ask for the waiver, quite honestly, without some specific reason for it, it's not going to be allowed. I also would say that I would suspect that this commission probably reviews the most notice of intents of any commission within the Commonwealth. If I had a guess, I'd say that that's true. So looking at the amount of properties affected by some of the regulations, obviously is going to affect a lot more properties and homeowners than it would in a case where you, like mentioned, Arlington. I mean, I'm assuming if you looked at the number of filings Arlington has compared to what you have on a yearly basis, it's probably nowhere close. And the last thing was just to be sure on the no pools in the flood zone. Specific in the salt marsh, it specifically says that's not waiverable, which I fully understand, but it would just be this, that you have the one section of that pools are not allowed in the flood zone. If there was at least some provision in there that said a waiver could be, to me, you could read that as being that, you know, that's not even waiverable. So if the wording for the waiver could be incorporated in the flood zone component, if that's the way you're going to go with it. Whereas specifically in the salt marsh, you say that this is not waiverable. It's just, it shows up as just pools are not in the flood zone. If there would be some wording in there that a waiver could be asked, whether it would be granted or not, who knows, but potentially if the pools, that the waiver component is incorporated somehow into the no pools in the flood zone. But it looks like you're maybe looking at something different with that anyway. And that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Rachel Freeman.
Thank you, Ashley. I was chiming in because there's a couple of questions I had actually. One was I wasn't sure the most constructive way to make comments on the proposed regulation changes, and I'm not sure if I should be submitting a letter to the Conservation Commission, if I should be writing an email, if I should be commenting today. So that was my first question. And then most of my comments surround the fact that I'm not sure in reading the proposed regulations that the commission let me change the way I'm going to phrase this. I think that I see a lot of reflection of the Baxter Road project in the proposed regulation changes, but I don't perhaps see as much thought given to potential coastal resiliency projects going forward that the town might need to undertake and how those would be permitted. So I feel like that is a very important component to be thinking through now. You know, these regulations don't get updated very often. And over the next 10 years, we are going to see some projects which are going to be beneficial to the town in terms of you know, maybe helping flooding for roads, or I can think of lots of different things, right? But as it stands with the current regulations, I have some concerns, and perhaps I'm not reading them as thoroughly as I should be, but I have concerns that these issues aren't being addressed. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I think to answer your first question, you know, commenting here today or writing a letter or email would all be appropriate, but I think because we're live today, getting the questions or concerns out now is great. And then a follow-up email or letter, because it sounds like we'll probably end up having another hearing. If you want to expand on those.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Jeff, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I know resiliency is something we talk a lot about and, kind of preparing for the future and dealing with some of that. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind with our regulations too, because I know when we're putting together our staff comments, and some thoughts, we had some interesting ideas, but one of the things that we're still kind of hamstrung with is just the fact that we can't make a less restrictive regulation than what the state currently has on the books. So we can't make something less restrictive than the State Wetlands Protection Act, which is also super frustrating because they're seemingly crushingly behind engineering and design and thought, especially related to things like coastal resiliency. And at some point, that's gonna have to get corrected. So I'll spare the soapbox speech on why the state has to update their regulations, but that's one of the things at times that causes our regulations to not be as adaptive as I think we'd all want them to be, is that we're still subject to that kind of restriction congruence with the state.
Thank you, Jeff. Linda, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, Dan brought it up because I remember I was the one that brought up that 2-foot separation and and how it was generated many years ago and there was no basis for it. So I think we were going to look at that when we were meeting in that ugly building as to how to phrase it or what to do with it, or do it on a case-by-case basis or something, because there was no basis for it to go in except for somebody in the office didn't like somebody. So, and I was in the office right across the hall at that point. So I think that has to be put in front of Jeff and see if he can come up with something on that one also, since he's doing the other bunch.
Thank you, Linda. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple quick points first in relation to Paul's comment. Yes, Nantucket Conservation Commission receives the most applications out of any conservation commission in the state. It's not even close. We're multiple thousands ahead of the next municipality. I think we're like 3 times more than anyone else. So we are aware of that. The regulations here that are proposed, though, with the exception of the Great Pond area that's been added, don't actually extend the buffer zones out any further than 100 feet. They just change the types of activities allowed within 100 feet. Maybe that will create more permitting. I'm not sure, but the 100-foot buffer zone is staying. I think if we had taken the 100-foot buffer zone and made it 150 or 200, that's a huge problem. That's going to cause a lot more work for the staff and commission. I think some of the changes in these regulations, like especially related to the minor activities changes that we're discussing, actually are going to cause a lot less work for the commission and the staff. So there's a give and take, but I don't think by doing this we're going to overburden anyone. And just in relation to the 2-foot separation point. So I don't really know the history. I was probably a child when it went into place, but I think that it actually, whether it was relevant at the time or not, is a performance standards that is very relevant today. Maybe the 2 feet exactly needs to be updated or edited, but we know with sea level rise that one of the things that's happening isn't only that, the salt water is coming in, it's also pushing the groundwater up, pushing the fresh water closer to the surface. So that's going to cause impacts. And if you have footings or, structures going down into an area that's wet, and with sea level rise, with water pushing up, that's gonna be impactful. Is 2 feet the right number? I'm not sure. We'd have to look at some science and look at some policy on that. But I absolutely don't agree with taking that out completely. And then I'll say, I know we're running up on the committee or commission reappointments. But I certainly don't support closing the hearing today. I think there's a lot of outstanding questions, and if we can get another hearing before the 30th, great. But I wouldn't be comfortable with moving forward today. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. I would agree. We have too many outstanding points going on. I think when we scheduled this meeting, we're hoping to get it done all before appointments, but not realistic in the time frame that the town works. So any other questions, comments, potential amendments from commissioners? Joe?
I think the point that Dan Malloy made is a very good one. That is a 30-day period before any changes are effective may be way too short. Somebody might be designing a house today and it won't be done in 30 days. And all of a sudden they're stuck with a problem. Something more like maybe 90 or 120 days would seem more appropriate, certainly longer than 30, I would think. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to look at historically how it's been done because, 6 months just allows for everybody to design something before we put regs in place, and we want to avoid that. So I think 60 days would be, plenty of time in my mind, just again, knowing that this has been in the works for quite some time. But that's just me. Jeff?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you guys can set the effective date for whenever, and we're happy to pull together. We haven't updated really since 2013, so it's been a while. And then before that, it was a few years. We can try to figure out when the effective dates were for those and what the timeframes were. I know that's something that we probably have minutes for, and Will, Lisa, and I could definitely probably find that out, but that's obtainable information.
Yeah, thank you. So if we think our meetings are long now, just wait till everybody's trying to shove potential projects through just to have plans through in case, in a 6-month period. Nightmarish. Linda, I see your hand up.
Yeah, that happens every time there's a change in regs, whether it's zoning or whether it's building caps or any of that stuff. It's always gets hysterical. But I do agree with Joe. I think the longer time frame, because it's not just us. You have to pull a building permit to protect it. And in a lot of cases, you have to pull it to protect the HDC changes or the zoning changes. And the HDC is moving along fairly quickly now, but you've got other aspects that sort of delay the production of a set of plans that are approvable. Then you got to go through the HERS rating, which are taking quite a while now because of the change in the bylaw on the 1st of January. So there's a lot of other forces at play that may delay them getting something approved to the point of where they can come to us or go get a building permit. So I think the longer time is better, but we're always going to have this mass hysteria, no matter what board we're dealing with, when there's a change.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Don Bracken?
Yes, hi, thank you. I just have one quick comment related to the groundwater separation issue. I think you sort of spelled out how the groundwater should be established, but I think it would probably make more sense to mimic the Title V definition or method for establishing high groundwater so that it's consistent. We're all used to doing it by that method. It also includes a method of establishing high groundwater when you're near coastal areas or within 300 feet of a tidally affected area. I just think that would probably help all of us to have a very well-defined method that we're all, accustomed to using and to establish that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion, Don. That's a great idea. Dan Malloy?
I just had one quick follow-up I forgot about, one just mentioned. And I mentioned this to Jeff, and you may have gotten an opinion or not gotten one back, but there's a couple of sections in the regs, the pond section that you're adding, as well as some of the sections to do with setbacks from beaches and coastal banks that have the multiplier on erosion rates. I'm sure you're familiar with which settings, the coastal beach, coastal bank, some of the other sections. And some of those have some of those sections talk about the setback of a structure from the coastal bank. Well, coastal bank, for example, has to be, I think it's 10 times the erosion rate, or there's different multipliers. And it talks about it having to be the most restrictive. And there could be situations where, let's say it's over 100 feet. Maybe as an erosion rate, whatever it is, that kicks it over 100 feet. And what I'd worry about is the wetland bylaw doesn't give the commission jurisdiction over 100 feet. So what I'm wondering is, should there be wording change or something in there that says it's the greater of, but no more than? So I think at some point, if you start regulating beyond the 100-foot buffer zone, you're going beyond what the bylaw allows you to do. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That's an important piece of language to clarify. Seth?
Just very quickly to staff as well. I know there was discussion about updating the bylaw itself as well. I know it's a different process, but is that still planned? Because if so, then it would clarify some of these issues.
I think ultimately, Seth, to answer that question, we're gonna have to probably do some level of update for the bylaw. Obviously, to update the bylaw, that would require town meeting approval to do. So I think we'd be looking at the next annual town meeting to clean that up.
Thank you for your question, Seth, and your response, Jeff. Any other questions or comments to get out on the regulations update? Just so we make sure that staff has everything they need to hopefully have a successful next public hearing. So it seems like everybody has all their thoughts out on the table. Jeff, do we need to continue this to a date certain?
I would say if we could, just given where we are tonight, I would say it may make some sense to continue it to next week's regular meeting, and we can pull together some alternative dates and things for there. And then I think as we dig through the comments we received tonight and stuff there, we'll have a better idea on how long it's gonna take to put together and what kind of review may be needed for it. But I think we can at least have that ballparked by next Thursday. So I think that would be a reasonable date to at least continue to, and then we can always continue it again from there.
Okay. So if nobody has any concerns with that, we will continue our discussion of revision and potential adoption of the new wetlands regulations to our next regular meeting on June 8th. And I appreciate everybody attending and reading through these lengthy regs for changes, because it's important to have as many sets of eyes on them as we can. So that will move us on to public meeting. We have a discussion of commission policies and procedures.
Will, do you want me to take this one, or do you want to talk about it? I'll start. All right, so one of the things that we try to do here in our office is try to keep everything up to date and kind of review all of the commission's policies and acting things. And we've been carrying this policy document around that was adopted in the mid-2000s and hasn't really been updated or thought about. And then when we were going through looking at it as we were getting ready for tonight's discussion too, we've also been thinking about, you know, how do we make our operation more efficient and easier for everyone to use, not just staff, but the commission and the general public. And how do we try to improve on our thing? And I think it was even mentioned tonight a couple times that we have the highest volume of applications in the state, and I think getting through those efficiently is something to be done. So we talk about it a lot here. Will and I probably almost on a daily basis are trying to figure out, how do we better get through field inspections, get through reporting requirements, get through enforcements, get through all of this, and then get a meeting together to not take forever. And I think we've also been seeing lately too, meetings that have been on average, 4 and 5 hours long in the last few times, and it's tough. And I think we'll all agree that it gets hard to really stay super productive at a certain point for everybody, just from fatigue, and that's totally fine. So we put together this little draft document, just an update on some general procedures, and then we took a really hard look at it, and I think we'll included the spreadsheet breakdown of meeting times by section. We've also been spitballing ideas on breaking the meeting into 2 meetings, breaking them into different times. But I think what we were hoping to do was at least start hopefully a small series of organizational meetings for the commission to talk about how we can make meetings more productive, be better use of time, or what people are willing to do time-wise to not sit through 4 and 5 hour meetings, get the information that they need, find ways to talk about the important issues and process the the easier applications of things without as much hassle as possible, but to hopefully improve our operations overall. And that was kind of the intent. It's not to say this is the only idea, that's what's there. I think we just wanted to say this was kind of an update of our old policies. What do you guys think? What suggestions do you have that can make our collective lives better, or wish list things that you guys would have to operate more efficiently? That was it.
Thank you, Jeff and Will, for putting this together and thinking more critically about it. I know the one thing that jumped out to me was the kind of public hearing being 5 p.m. on Thursdays, and then potentially public meeting 3 p.m. on the following Thursday to break it up. I go both ways with that. Part of me says power through the long meeting so that you get a week of mental rest, even if the items are easier. But our meetings have been super long. So I think that is an important item to discuss, and also people's ability to come to an earlier time to be, participating in the public meeting portion. Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jeff. I recently haven't discussed it with the whole commission, but just with an email I sent to Jeff, Will, and Ashley about the possibility of putting some things on consent like other boards do. Now, I realize that may not be popular with everybody, but we have some pretty organized packets that we could review, and if any commissioner ever felt that they wanted to pull something out for public discussion, that would be doable as well. But just to try to streamline, if there is possible scenarios where things can be done under consent. I don't fully know what I'm talking about, mind you, when I say that, but that could possibly streamline meetings as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I know after your email, I did go in and I met with Jeff and Will about this. And Jeff, you made it seem like under our regulatory structure, we can't have items go through on consent like maybe the HDC does.
Yes and no to that. Sorry, you certainly can. You would just have to essentially adopt the policy. So just as an example, trying to think of a good one, right? If if RDAs, if we put together something that provided a clear staff recommendation for people in advance, and you had like 5 RDAs, you could kind of do them in mass and say, does anyone have questions about any of them? Where you could do it through consent to some degree that way. We still have kind of state approval requirements where, you know, we don't necessarily have the same level of like, you know, staff level approval for some things. But I think that there would be ways, as long as there was a clear adopted policy by the board, that you were to say, you know, in an extreme sense, just for examples here, I'm not saying this is the right one. We hear all notices that aren't requesting waivers in mass, and if people are here to comment, we'll pull it out and hear it separately. Or if commissioners have questions, but if not, we'll close the public hearing on 1, 3, and 5 because no one has questions, and you could do it that way. That's like a pseudo consent kind of situation. But I think if that's something that the commission is interested in, I think we're happy to explore what that would look like, or what other commissions statewide that do similar things do and have adopted policy wise to get to people. Like I said, we just weren't sure what everyone's appetite was for what level of policy change for review we were looking at. But wanted to have the conversation on how we could try to improve operations.
Thank you, Jeff. Seth, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I don't have any issue with looking at that. I think also the minor activities language that's in the regulatory update is going to alleviate the burden to some extent. I mean, it's only like 6 things that are being covered under there, but any of those things wouldn't really have to come to the commission. They could just essentially be approved. I do think that, you know, there are some items that there are a lot of comments, and then there are some items that nobody has any comment. So I don't know if there's a way to do a notice of intents being like, the chair opens the hearing, and then before the applicant makes a presentation, being like, can we get a sense of the commission to see if anyone has questions or comments on this based on what's in the packet? And then if no, then maybe they don't have to do their presentation at all. We could just like go to a vote. I don't know if that's legal or regulatory compliant or whatever, but I know I speak a lot. I'm aware of that. I apologize for taking the time. I'm not trying to do that selfishly. I'm trying to do that because I have concerns about the wetland protected interests. But I think the areas where sort of nobody has any concerns, we could just sort of move them along.
Thank you, Seth. That's definitely an idea to work through.
Yeah, like I said, in Seth's example, I think as long as you provide members of the public or other parties the opportunity to comment on every application, because that's what's required by state law. But if there were ones that no one had any questions and no one had any comments, you guys could certainly close the public hearing and take action if you wanted to. And you could do that in groups or even in mass in some degrees. Again, some of this also, right, these are all policy questions and procedural questions. So it's not like if you try something and don't like it, as long as it's legal, you can always adjust and go. So if someone has an idea, we can certainly investigate what that would entail and try to puzzle it out a little bit.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I mean, I know a lot of the time that we're spent is
Sorry,
like,
Seth. I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if people can mute who aren't speaking. Sorry, go ahead, Seth.
I know a lot of the time that we spent are on like relatively few applications with a lot of questions and comments and back and forth and public input. But even the presentations themselves, let's say they take average 5 minutes, so let's say we have 12 notice of intent, 6 of them have no issue. And we don't even take a presentation on those, we just go to commissioner comment, public comment, and then close based on what's in the packet. That's 30 minutes of time of not hearing a presentation.
Definitely true, and I take that point. I think I'm someone who sometimes needs to process through things a few times, so there's like aspects of projects that I end up missing in our lengthy packets that I pick up on during the presentation, and I know that's like very limited cases, but I just worry about some details being missed. But again, we have super long meetings, so I think this is a great discussion to have to think about ways to reduce them. Linda?
I was instrumental in starting the consent agenda at the HDC when I was on it, and the chairman, but it works very effectively. But if somebody does have a question about something, they can pull it out at the meeting and we talk about it. But otherwise, everybody's looked at their packets. They have no comments and they do vote them in mass. So long as we vote for things, I think we're within the statute requirements for the Concom, if they're anything like the other two boards. So they have big blocks of things at the planning board also, A&Rs, permitted plans, things like that they vote in blocks. Unless somebody has a problem with something, they pull it off to hear it. So I think there's a way to streamline what we're doing. And I frankly trust the staff to catch what they need to catch or give us the advice, because both at the HDC in the old days and at the planning board currently, they do get staff reports. But I'd like to concentrate on the stuff that we really need to concentrate on, and not waste a lot of time on stuff we don't need to concentrate on, and get it voted on and out of our face so we can actually go to the stuff that we really need to spend time on.
Thank you, Linda. No, I agree. Like things like septic upgrades, and like there are some no-brainers to kind of move through. So definitely understand that. Dan Malloy, do you have a question or comment?
Just a quick comment. I just wanted to support Jeff and Seth's comments. So we do a lot of work in the town of Dartmouth, and their conservation commission, they group all the applications, they do group all the RDAs together, they group all the NOIs together. And they'll do something similar to what you're talking about. The agent will typically give a quick rundown on each application. And if no one has comments, well, first off, they might vote just to approve all the RDAs if there's no public comment, one fell swoop like you're talking about. And then when it comes to the notices of intent, the agent will typically make a quick, 1 minute or 5 minute rundown summary as to what the application's about. And if nobody has questions after the commissioners have their chance and the public is opened up, they might vote to approve. So there's oftentimes in Dartmouth where we'll go for a project and we may never speak. So just to go to Seth's point, we could be there if necessary, but sometimes we don't even need to be there, depending on the complexity of the application. So I know other towns do it, and it certainly would save you some time in your process. That's it.
Thank you, Dan. Mark?
Thank you, Ashley. No, I think the consent idea is a wonderful idea. It would save us a lot of time on the easy ones and the obvious ones. And if there's any questions, we can go to questions. So I totally support the idea. And one thought for staff, I'm sorry that David Haynes isn't on the call. He's been a long time chairman of a town in the Commonwealth. I've forgotten what town it is now, but he's been doing it forever. And he may have experience to draw on this very topic. So that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments about the policies and procedures? Again, probably something to table and brainstorm a little bit. Jeff?
So we'll kind of put this behind the regulation update for to-dos, but we'll try to pull together. It sounds like people are most interested in I guess for lack of better terms, we'll call it the consent style that Dan was talking about for Dartmouth for at least providing. And so we'll try to pull some of that info together. And maybe we'll even try to send folks a link if we can find one of their meetings so they can actually like watch it and see how it works. We could probably get that together too. But we'll do the regulations first, and then we'll get to this.
Well, thank you, Jeff. We appreciate it. And I guess this, we'll just have another discussion whenever it's ready.
Yeah, it's not a public hearing or debate. We can just, when we feel like it's close, we'll just give everyone notice and send it around, and we'll add it to a regular meeting agenda. And if we want to break it out to something special, we certainly can.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so that moves us on to our enforcement updates. Some of these are oldies. I don't know, Will, are you taking it?
Yes. So I'm not sure if did Jeff forward or send out an Excel spreadsheet at any point today? Jeff? All right.
No, I failed. I'll get it up and I can share my screen though.
Okay, cool. Fairly boring to look at, but this is just kind of a list that we've come up with. I think there's 12 different enforcements. I can actually share my screen, Jeff. Oh, I'm not allowed to. I'm not the host tonight.
All right, try now.
All right, let's see. Yes. All right, so we've come up with this special list of legacy enforcements or enforcements that have been sent out and have never been responded to. I actually drafted 3 letters today that are going to be for the enforcements that have been sent out and not responded to, that will be requesting a response or filing of an NOI or whatever it may be for a given specific enforcement on this table. We're going to give people 30 days to do whatever is required and then start levying a daily fine to be assessed weekly. So I think that's $50 a day and then $350 weekly. The bulk of these are going to require a little more digging and meeting with people to figure out how we're going to address them. But the more simple ones that are just going to require reaching out and giving people kind of a final notice, those letters will be going out tomorrow. So I'm not sure if there's any questions or if there's anything specific that anybody has a question about or anything that maybe isn't on this list.
Linda, I see your hand up.
I'm particularly irritated by the viewing platform that took place up there towards the lighthouse on the water side. When they got rid of the foundation, they have a little viewing platform and stairs going up to the viewing platform from their parking area. This has been going on for a couple of years. Is that on this list?
That's the 315, 317.
15. Yeah, that's what I thought. That really needs to be taken care of.
There was a court date for that one, right, Jeff? And they just ended up paying the fine at the court date, if I remember correctly.
To be exact, they paid right about 10 minutes before their hearing.
Yeah,
So-
but did they remove it?
No.
No. So what do we do now?
I think
This
we're
is
going to be,
particularly egregious because the whole situation is egregious out there. What do we do now about where do we go from here?
Well, we'll have to re-engage through the process to answer that question, but I think in this case too, we obviously have some pretty egregious violations to building zoning and HDC from it as well.
Yeah,
It's
the
gonna
building
have-
was all over it and HCC was all over it and it's still there.
So we're gonna have to have a little bit more coordinated response.
But we got to have a response. I mean, they can just continue to, because of who they are and their connections in Washington, they can continue to just pay the fine.
well,
Where's that going to get us?
I'm curious, they don't have a certificate of compliance for their work there, right? So that's open. So that does present a little bit of a challenge for them as well, that they don't have that piece, but I agree. We need a coordinated front and that structure should be removed.
There is a bylaw, Madam Chair, in the town. When people don't do what they're told to do by the town can do it and then charge them, kind of thing. Now, I don't know if that's strictly related to, you got to get your foliage off the town road, like on Brant Point, which is all over the place. Or a tree or something that fell in the road, and then you can charge them if they don't remove it themselves. I don't know if we have that kind of ability.
That may be encroachment specific, but I can check.
A town council question.
But it's got to go. Something's got to happen here. They've just been going on for several years. It's enough is enough.
Yeah, we have a few of those that have been going on for a very long time unresolved, but that is a glaring one, I would agree. Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to Will. Will, when you had the screen share up, I was reading through the nature of the violation, and then there was one that was called BVW. I don't know what that stands for.
That's a bordering vegetated wetland.
Ah, thank you. I should know what that stands for.
That's
You know what it is.
That's that state slang. You know what it is.
Yeah.
Now I'm cool.
Any other kind of questions and comments about the enforcements? I know I'm just want to see progress, but I'm happy to see the list and at least the addresses and people who need to be contacted so that we'll start seeing these humans in the near future. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for staff for putting this together. And hopefully we can get these done with the typical enforcement process and the non-criminal disposition process. But we do have alternatives at our disposal if needed. We have the criminal complaint alternative and the civil penalty alternative. I know town council has briefed us on these for different purposes in the past. They both have pros and cons. So hopefully we don't get to that, but in these egregious cases, we might have to take more substantive action than we've had taken in the past.
Cool.
Thank you, Seth. That's definitely an important reminder and some tools. Jeff and Will, you both have your hands up. Who wants to go?
Jeff has seniority.
All right, Jeff was pointing at you, but Jeff, take it.
All right, I'll go first. I mean, just some thoughts on some of these that have open permits. As much as I hate to say it, is we could revoke permits. We have that ability. I just realized some of them are old and outstanding, but then it would put a greater violation out there. I have some ideas. I don't know why I never thought of until just now, but it's something that Linda said on 115, 117 Baxter Road is, interestingly enough, I'll have to pull the language of it. They actually hold the easement through the select board too for locating the house partially within the roadway layout. So we may be able to bring the biggest stick possible that we have to help correct that. I don't know why I hadn't thought of that till just now, but I did. So we'll look at that, but I think that may be an interesting option for some of these to maybe even start a revocation process on a permit, because that becomes really problematic for them having a revoked permit on record on your lot. So that may be an interesting avenue to explore.
Thank you for that idea. See, sometimes ideas do come out just in the meeting discussion that you wouldn't think of on paper, but that's a great idea. And I think for a couple of these might be a necessary avenue. Any other questions or comments about the enforcement list? I know we'll be seeing these again. So This is just initial discussion. Will?
Yeah, I just want to say very generally that I think having this list is really the important first step, and then figuring out how we deal with each one in here in the office. Like I'm very confident in our ability to circle the wagons and annoy people that need to be annoyed to make things happen. But having this priority list is really good, and I'm happy that Jeff and I were able to come up with this, and I don't know, it's good. I think there's, like I said, there's 3 letters that are going to be going out tomorrow to start the process on 3 of these. There's clearly some more difficult ones in there, but I think that we can get creative in here and deal with some of this stuff.
Well,
That is all.
thank you, Will and Jeff, for getting all this together for us. Joe, I saw your hand up.
A question I have is, I couldn't read everything that was on the screen. Is 2 Gully Road on there? Now, it's part of an enforcement action that's going to last for 3 years. Shouldn't it be on there so it's a reminder for whoever's in our place one of these days that needs to be done?
Thank you, Joe. I believe Will can speak to this, but I think he has a current list that would include 2 Gully. This list is all kind of historic violations that kind of got lost in COVID, and that
Okay,
really get transferred to Will from Jeff and Joanne, and we didn't want them to be forgotten about. So we're just kind of bringing the attention and spotlight back to them to make sure that we can resolve them.
so there is another list.
There is, and hopefully we'll end up merging the list, because we're going to check these 12 boxes into like active enforcements and go from there. But Will can speak to his organization. So Will, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, this is actually just a different page on the main spreadsheet. So this page is exactly as Ashley just said. This is the kind of like legacy enforcements that were nice gifts for me. Thank you. And we have the kind of current list and potential enforcements. And as these are being dealt with, as Ashley said, they're going to move over into the current active enforcement database, which is where things like Gully Road are. But that is it. And I'd be happy to send, any of these spreadsheets if anybody wants to see them, etc.
It would be great to, I think, email the list out just so we can have a little bit more of a thorough glance, especially for newer commissioners who didn't hear these originally, if they want to, pull up the plans or whatever to see those properties. So if there are no more comments and questions on the enforcement update, again, we'll be hearing hopefully from these individuals, especially the ones getting letters sent out tomorrow within the next couple of weeks. And hopefully we'll resolve some of these things. And that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is adjournment. Is there a motion? Joe's making that motion. I think Mark is giving it a second. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Garrisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
Mizzarelli, Landowski,
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
That carries unanimously, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for all your time, always, for the Conservation Commission.
Good meeting, folks.
Yep.
Very
Very good.
Good night.
Productive.
Everybody.
Good night,
Have a great
everyone.
night, everyone.
Night.
Two. Now I'm off to another Zoom meeting.